So this footage is captured from Al-Shifa. This particular hospital is located in the North Ramal neighborhood in Gaza City. This is the largest medical complex and is the central hospital in the entire Gaza Strip. It's the big one. It's been around since roughly since the 1950s. The situation at Al-Shifa is, there's no other word than catastrophic that I can think of. An impending public health catastrophe. There are thousands, if not tens of thousands, of people who have sought refuge in the hospital and on the grounds there around the hospital. The refugees are inside the hospital in the hallways. They're in the stairwells. They're in the wards between the patient beds. They're everywhere. According to hospital surgeon Ghassan Abu Sita, about 40% of the people that are being treated at the hospital are children. Most of these kids have lost either one or both of their parents in these Israeli airstrikes. They're orphans. They've been orphaned. Many of them are facing a really long recovery period because of the extent of their injuries. Can you imagine being a little kid going through multiple surgeries and you don't have your mom or dad around? You learn that they're dead. Can you imagine the terror and trauma that a child must feel? And there are countless children going through this. Dr. Sita believes that the Israelis are trying to orchestrate a collapse of the healthcare and emergency rescue system there in Gaza, because the tactic, which is something Israel has done multiple times in the past, is to ramp up pressure and misery on the Palestinian society and intimidate them and make them feel such collective terror that they will never again try and raise their heads in defiance of the occupation. He said, Dr. Sita said that unless the international community intervenes, and I mean immediately intervenes, Al-Shifa is going to experience total disaster. And I'll explain why in a second. Another doctor, Suel Talal Abu Gambuz, he said that they have very little fuel left at the hospital and that it's going to run out at any moment. I mean, it could happen within hours. When this happens, the machines that are keeping the patients alive are going to stop. Israel, I'm sure you know, they've already cut off food. They've cut off water. They have stopped medical supplies from reaching Gaza. They've cut off the electricity because Israel controls most of the electricity to Gaza. But the thing is, the hospital, without the electricity, these hospitals have to rely on generators, which run off of fuel. And that is what the main crisis is, or one of the main crises, is the lack of fuel. Israel has cut off access to fuel, which means that the generators are getting ready to shut down. The hospitals are going to have no power whatsoever to treat the thousands of injured patients that keep pouring in. The general director of Al-Shifa's medical complex is a man named Mohammed Abu Silmiya. He took reporters over to the only working generator that is keeping the hospital power on. I don't know if you've ever seen out on the road, like one of the little square trailers, about a 4x8 trailer, U-Haul trailer that you can rent, pull behind your vehicle. That is the size of the generator that is keeping this entire medical complex. 3 hospitals connected to this complex. That's what is running everything. Running off of fuel. He said that that there are dozens of patients on ventilators, over 1,000 Palestinians who are relying on this generator to keep their dialysis going, which they have to stay alive. These are people who were already on dialysis before all of this broke out. Then you've got the neonatal ward that is brimming with newborn babies. They've had to be placed on in these incubators, and I guess the video that I'm showing here, I think somewhere in there you'll see some footage of it. They're in incubators because because of the war, they've been born prematurely, and they weigh, some of them, most of them actually, weigh less than 1 kilogram. My little twins were 5 pounds when they were born, and they were preemies. They were real little. No, I'm sorry, they weren't preemies, but because they were twins, they were born, underweight. 1 kilogram? So the neonatal department is experiencing a major crisis. As of today, the hospital has 40 incubators. They have 65 babies that are relying on incubators to live. So the system has been pushed beyond its capacity. They're having to double up babies in these incubators. The head of the neonatal department is Nasser Bulbul. He says the hospital can't even get basic medicine for the children, or for anyone, but including for these babies. They estimate at Al-Shifa that they are going to be out of all medicine of every kind, inside the neonatal department within 24 hours. There's nothing left, and they can't get any more. They're stretching their equipment far beyond what it was designed to do. For example, one ventilator, you have a cable. The cables are supposed to be switched, changed out every use. They are having to use one cable 10 times in a row because they don't have enough. What this does is it exposes these 1 kilogram baby to viral infections. It increases the amount of attention that the medical team has to put into caring for these babies, on top of the extreme conditions that they're already operating under. Now, when the fuel runs out, 65 babies that are there right now, stuffed into 40 respirators. Once the fuel runs out, all 65 babies will be dead within 5 minutes. So now do you understand why the act of cutting off Gaza's access to fuel is so much more barbaric than what our Western media makes it sound like? And this is one hospital I'm talking about. It's the biggest hospital in Palestine, between Gaza and the West Bank. It's a 700-bed capacity hospital. But because Israel has been targeting civilian apartments in these residential areas and homes, residential buildings, the wounded have been flooding into the hospital. A torrent. 700 beds. The doctors and the hospital staff are treating, right now, more than 2,500 patients in a 700-bed facility. And there are so many more that they can't even get to. Each hospital room has triple the number of patients that it's designed to accommodate, which is why so many of them, they're having to treat them out on hallways. They're having people with incredible wounds sleeping on the floor in hallways. Dr. Sitta, the surgeon that I mentioned earlier, he talked about the typical patient he worked on. And I saw footage of him with this little 5-year-old girl. And he was pointing out major injuries to her arms, to her legs, to her back that are going to require not one, but several surgeries. How are any of these people, including this girl, going to get these surgeries done if they've got enough fuel for like 24 hours to 48 hours? A lot of these people have experienced phenomenal damage to their bodies. They're missing limbs. They've suffered extremely severe punctures and lacerations to their bodies, damage to their internal organs. You've got doctors operating without being able to give the victims any kind of anesthesia because they ran out of painkillers long ago. They can't get any more in because Israel won't allow it. What the hell kind of regime exacts that kind of vengeance on people who are already suffering? It is genocide. It is cruel, heartless, barbaric genocide, and CNN will not show you that. Can you imagine being on an operating table, especially as a child, missing an arm? You have a doctor cutting into you, and they don't have any painkillers for you? They're operating on people in the hallways because they can't stuff any more people into the surgical units. And it's not like these people, after they've had a surgery, can be discharged to go back to their homes and recover so they can free up more room for other people. Where are these people going to go? They have no homes left. Most of these people are in the hospital to begin with because Israel demolished their homes down on top of them. Where can these people go? And so they remain there. They're unable to leave. Israel continues to bomb apartment buildings. Palestinians continue to pull victims from the rubble and try and rush them to the hospital. And this catastrophe has been going on for weeks, and it is likely going to continue for many more weeks. The state of Israel knows. It's not like they don't know that this is going on. They know about the humanitarian catastrophe that they have created. Israel knows about the thousands of wounded civilians that are in the hospitals. And yet Israel continues to hold up humanitarian convoys while it carries out more and more airstrikes on civilian areas, pushing the death toll higher, the severe casualties beyond anything that the hospitals could possibly handle. I should point out that the hospitals, they're not just using power for their normal business, for what they normally do. They're having to use more power than they normally do because they have to accommodate so many more people. You've got hundreds of refugees who are taking shelter at the hospitals because they hope that Israel won't bomb the hospitals and kill them. They know they're not safe anywhere else. Think of what's going through these people's minds. If Israel can carry out hundreds upon hundreds of airstrikes against clearly civilian areas, civilian homes, and the world refuses to take a stand against Israel and make them stop by any means necessary, diplomatic or otherwise, the Palestinian people know they are truly alone and at the mercy of a merciless enemy. The hospital there in Al-Sharif can't handle this increase in the power usage. The maintenance director, Baha al-Kailani, talked about how the refugees are taking shelter at the hospital. They don't just sleep there. They need to eat. They need to drink. They need to use the bathroom. Occasionally, they need to bathe to remove the filth and the blood and the debris clinging to them. Because they've come from a war zone, their apartments have been brought down around them. All of these services require the use of power from the generators that are already straining to keep up with the basic needs of the hospital. One man, a resident of Gaza with 3 young children, I watched him. He poured his heart out as he recounted taking his family to 3 different shelters trying to find safety. He said that Israel told them, look, we're going to bomb your area. You need to leave Esbat Abed Rabu, go to Jabalia, which is what he did. He took his family there. And then the Israeli army bombed Jabalia, the very place that they had made him flee to. So they went to Al-Jalal, hoping it would be safe. Israel bombed that location as well. And they didn't give any advance warning. It's not like Israel is being responsible and saying, hey, get out of the way, we're going to bomb this area. They hit the building he was in was a 6th-floor building. Israel's attack collapsed 3 of the floors, massacred a bunch of people. And I don't know if that is where this man lost his wife, but somewhere along the way in all of this, Israel's military killed her. And he's dragging his 3 young children around, trying to get them somewhere. And so now he's at Al-Sharif. What Israel is doing is a war crime of historic proportions. Even in times of war, there are rules of engagement. A civilized nation does not massacre thousands of civilians. That is not what a civilized nation does, and you can read into that what you think I'm saying. But Israel has done it, not once, not twice, but over and over again, and they keep getting away with it. They slaughtered masses of civilians in 2008, masses of civilians in 2014. The Palestinian people live under military occupation. They are unarmed. They don't have a military to use to fight back with or to defend themselves with, which is exactly how Israel wants it, because the government is a bunch of cowards. They don't want a straight up fair fight. They want these people handicapped, unarmed, docile. Imagine this same scenario in your country. I would imagine most of you watching are here in the United States. Imagine that a hostile military power is relentlessly bombing your neighborhood, slaughtering your neighbors, killing everyone around you. So you take your spouse and your children and you flee with nothing but the clothes on your back. You can't take food, you can't take water, no personal possessions. You can't even carry diapers for your babies. You're lucky if you even had time to grab your own shoes as the apartment comes down around you. So you race around trying to find a safe place for your little ones, but everywhere you go, there is blood and horror, missiles of death and devastation raining down around you like hellfire pouring from the sky. And despite you never having lifted a finger against the people who are murdering you and your family and the people you love, the enemy in the media has successfully branded you and your children as terrorists. Terrorists who have to be eradicated like vermin, and you've got the United States of America and these Western countries cheering them on. Why? Because poor Israel, the perpetual victim, you and your very breath is an existential threat to them and their way of life. Heaven forbid that you and your children, where you are, were to end up seriously injured from the bombs, and you ended up in a hospital because this same enemy is threatening to bomb the hospital as well. Can you imagine your terror? Can you imagine the psychological trauma that your children would be experiencing? And if the enemy did succeed in killing your family members, which is the goal of Israel, to carry out as much mass slaughter of civilians as possible, would you not spend the rest of your life trying to avenge the deaths of your wives, your husbands, your children? Maybe you wouldn't. Maybe you're better than I am. Maybe you have more control than I do. Maybe you think you could just go back to your old way of life, move on, not think about it. But I'm telling you, from having watched scenes like this play out in country after country that the USA has bombed, Israel is not killing terrorists. Israel is breeding them. They are guaranteeing that their own citizens in Israel are going to see increased acts of violence perpetrated against them by some of the Palestinians who managed to survive this attempted genocide. I'm not saying that it's right, I'm not advocating it, but it is the way things are. I've been using this word catastrophe, and I feel kind of stupid using that word over and over, because it's just not enough. One of the doctors at the hospital, in an interview I saw, He specifically said, catastrophe does not sum it up. Conditions are worse than that. The doctor was Dr. Al-Hayati, told reporters in total frustration they have nearly run out of everything they need to treat even simple injuries, to say nothing of the severely injured. She was lamenting that they have to put patients on the floor all over the hospital because there's no beds for them. They can't put people who need beds in beds. It's utterly inhumane. Who knows? Maybe in the end, it's not going to matter for these people, whether or not they're on the floor or not, because the hospital says that Israel keeps giving them warnings that everyone needs to evacuate the hospital complex, the thousands of people there, because it may go ahead and carry out airstrikes directly against Al-Shifa as well. They're telling them that. I'm pissed off. I don't know if you can tell. I am pissed off. There was another doctor who was pretty upset, as he was talking about how Israel is preventing medicine from being delivered. He specifically talked about medicine that's needed to run the dialysis machines. There was one patient, a guy in his, I think he's in his late 50s from how he looks, Ziad Rajab al-Hissi. He talked about how difficult it was to get to the hospital for his dialysis treatments, and he's got to have them to survive, because almost all of the vehicles are out of gas, right? They've cut off fuel. He can't get a ride. He lives too far away. He can't keep getting rides. Plus, most of the roads have been damaged from these airstrikes, which makes it a lot more difficult to get to the hospital, even when he does find transportation. So what he decided to do is what hundreds of others are doing. He decided he's going to sleep there on the ground outside the hospital at night. I saw a woman named Awa Ramadan Aid Ashur, another dialysis patient. She made it to the hospital in fear of her life after the home of the host family that she was staying with was hit by Israeli shelling. And what's crazy is her own home had previously been destroyed. Her family's car was set on fire from one of these missile strikes, burned it up. These people are not just suffering physically, but they're also suffering emotionally. They are mentally traumatized by the apocalyptic war of extermination that's being waged on them by the powerful Zionist military. Several of them said that they knew they could die at any moment. If not from the bombs, then from the hospital running out of fuel and not being able to provide them with the life-saving treatments that they need. There's already been 15 hospitals in Gaza that have been completely shut down, either because of airstrikes or because they have already run out of fuel. And you may have seen videos this week of doctors trying to perform operations in the dark by the light of a cell phone light. But you can imagine how those operations probably went. Israel has taken out at least 25 ambulances. There have been multiple paramedics to be killed. Journalists have been killed. But these rescue workers, they're not legitimate targets even in the time of war. Even in world wars, medics, rescue teams are off limits because their work is impartial. They're not trying to kill anyone. Their goal is to save lives. A paramedic in Gaza named Talal Taha, he survived an onslaught from Israeli airstrikes just recently, targeted him and his co-workers. They were in clearly identifiable ambulances. They were trying to evacuate civilians injured in an Israeli attack. But when the shelling resumed, they're like, we got to get out of here. They tried to drive away to safety. He looks in his rearview mirror and he sees the ambulance behind him gets hit. Blows it up. He knows he's going to get hit if he stays in this ambulance because Israel is targeting the ambulances. So he stops, he jumps out. 2 more missiles struck, one in front of the ambulance, one behind it. Of course, they ended up not being able to evacuate the people who subsequently died because they couldn't get them to the hospital. 2 of the paramedics with him were killed in the strikes. Israel is spreading death everywhere. I haven't talked a whole lot. I've mostly been talking about the people who are still alive, trying to survive at the hospitals. But the volume of corpses, the dead people ending up at the hospital, it's like something out of a horror movie. Upwards of 7,000 people have been killed in 2 weeks, right? Nearly half of them have been children. Al-Shifa has processed so many dead bodies that they ran out of places to put them. They even brought in ice cream trucks and filled the trucks with bodies to try and keep the bodies from decomposing because they can't get them buried in mass graves fast enough. And I'm talking about bodies that have been torn to shreds from bombs and pulverizing apartment collapses that have ripped and rended their bodies beyond the ability to identify them. Those trucks they've already been filled up. No more room, so now they're putting them in tents outside because they have nowhere else to put these bodies with any degree of dignity because they can't get the bodies buried fast enough. Over the last couple of weeks, I've seen photos and videos, hundreds, maybe 1,000 bodies. Many of them mangled like they've been put through a kitchen meat grinder, just stomach churning. And I remember the first time I saw a bunch of corpses, specifically dead children. It was in the aftermath of the first Gulf War back in 1990, 91. Left 200,000 Iraqis dead. It was even worse in 2003 when we had the subsequent Iraq War based on lies. I can still see some of the images of those bodies in my mind's eye today, decades later. It left a mark on my soul. It helped to convince me of the true nature of war. And it filled me with this inner compulsion to go down a path of activism and education, trying to teach people, trying to discourage people and their governments from entering into wars for all of these stupid, frivolous reasons that are always given to the people to justify what is really just government-sponsored mass murder on behalf of corporations, the war industry, oil corporations. If you are so inclined, if you're a dummy like me, and you want to see some of the awful images of the Israeli slaughter of Gaza over the last couple of weeks, you can go to my Telegram channel, t.me/Blackstone Intel. I think you have to have the Telegram app downloaded in order to view it, but I warn you, the content is graphic, and I strongly discourage anyone from viewing it unless you go into it with taking responsibility. It's your choice, but I warned you. I put the photos and videos up there not to entertain anyone, not because I'm sick, but because I believe as a journalist in documenting these events to educate people about the true nature of war so people will do everything in their power to avoid it. Fellow Americans, better wake up. This is not just going to stay in Israel between Israel and the Palestinians. This is getting bigger. This is getting bigger real fast. I even hate to use the word war in this context. This isn't really a war, you know? I've noticed on several mainstream news sites in the United States, they refer to all of this as a war between Israel and Hamas. The Israel and Hamas war. That's propaganda at its most sinister. Israel isn't fighting Hamas. It is waging an unrelenting campaign of terror and ethnic cleansing against an unarmed population that has done nothing wrong. Unless you want to say they put up with this crap from Israel for far too long, That's the only criticism I would have. It isn't fair to even characterize this as a war because there's no back and forth battling between Hamas and Israel. Hamas militants, they committed atrocities on the first day, and I don't excuse it. I don't justify it. I don't try and defend it whatsoever. I absolutely repudiate every single act of violence against anyone, whether they are Jewish, Arab, or anywhere in between. But Hamas has done virtually nothing since then. Over the last 2 weeks, though, Israel has slaughtered Palestinian civilians who had nothing to do with the actions on October 7th by Hamas, by the military, with the militant wing. There's simply no way whatsoever that any rational or moral human being can justify what Israel's doing. Now, I know the Christian Zionists give it their damn best to explain how, Jesus is on the side of God's people. Jesus is really down with mass murder and slaughtering children. I'll tell you what this is. Israel is drunk with bloodlust. The far-right extremist government of Israel, which shocks even a lot of the Israeli citizens who normally are okay with far-right extremism. They are carrying out state-level terrorism. It is a historic level of genocide that I guarantee you, when we look back a few years from now, it will be recorded in history books for all time as one of the most heinous atrocities in modern times. I can't stop this war machine. I can't do it. You can't do it. But I can use my influence to wake up a lot of people to the side of that, of this story that the fiends in the corporate media is keeping from them. Before I started the stream, let me turn off this. I'm going to turn off this video here. Before I started the stream, I looked up my analytics on YouTube and Twitter and some of the other social media platforms. And over the last 2 weeks, I've been able to reach about 350,000 people, which is way less than what I used to be able to reach. But because of the suppression, the account suppression that my channels are under. But the reason I've been able to reach about 350,000 people in 2 weeks is in part because so many of you out there are sharing this stuff. You're sharing my messages that I post in social media. You are sharing my YouTube videos. And that is helping to get the word out. That's getting another viewpoint out. We won't convince everyone. We may even just have a very small number of people that we convince. But we will bring people to a knowledge of what's really happening. We just have to keep at it. Over and over and over. We must be as unrelenting as Israel. This cycle is never going to end unless the world unites to finally compel Israel to end its illegal military occupation of Palestinian territories.